going to talk about it actually goes beyond that. It has a history, a biblical history that was before Acts chapter 2. And but we're going to read that. I did not give, Rachel made the slides as well. So not only did she have to lead worship, she also made the slides for me. And that's what you get for volunteering, Rachel. So, but Acts chapter 2, it's not up here, but it is on the sheet. Verse 1 through 4, I'm going to read it in the Passion Translation. It says, on the day Pentecost was being fulfilled, that means on the day, that means it was Pentecost already. On the day Pentecost was being fulfilled, all the disciples were gathered in one place. Suddenly they heard a sound of a violent blast of wind rushing into the house from out of the heavenly realm. The roar of the wind was so overpowering, it was all anyone could bear. Then all at once a pillar of fire appeared before their eyes. It separated into tongues of fire that engulfed each one of them. They were all filled and equipped with the Holy Spirit and were inspired to speak in tongues, empowered by the Spirit to speak in languages they had never learned. Now, how many have ever heard of like a certain church being Pentecostal? Like, oh, they're Pentecostal, or a church associating with Pentecostal. Now, I grew up in such a church. I grew up Pentecostal background. From being 3 days old, I got proof. It's in my baby book. My mom wrote it in there. You know how like a lot of parents, now they have babies and like don't want to take the baby out anywhere? Not my parents. 3 days after I was born, I was in Sunday service at church, and it even says, oh, everybody was so happy to see you. Everybody wanted to hold you, and you were passed around. Everybody else is worried. All the other parents were worried about, like, oh, my baby's going to get sick. My parents were passing me around like a football. Now, here's the thing. If you say Pentecostal, depending on how you grew up and depending on your circumstances and situations, you may see it differently than somebody else. And here's the thing. Words don't so much matter, but it's the images that you get in your head of the words. Like, say L-Dog goes to Walmart, and he says, man, this morning I was at Walmart, and I stood in line forever. Well, none of us actually think he stood in line forever. One, he's here at church. We just figure he stood in line for a very long time. But forever means forever, like constantly. None of us would stand in a line anywhere forever, right? I don't care how good the food is, because you're never going to get it because you're going to be in line forever. So not so much the words that matter as much as the pictures that go along with the words. So when I say Pentecostal, you may think something different than someone who grew up in a Pentecostal church. How many other than me grew up in a Pentecostal church? All right, there's quite a few Pentecostals. How many of you grew up in a Baptist church? All right. How about a Catholic church? All right. I always find that interesting. It's something about the ministry. There's always people that have the Catholic background, but so now there comes this thing that we grew up in Pentecostal church, being around people that were Pentecostal. There's this thing that was like Pentecostal pride, and even if you same thing, Baptist church, you grew up in Baptist pride. That's why there was such a pushback when they took the name off the sign, the Fairlawn Baptist Church. Because why? Because it's sentimental. It has it means something to the people that grew up in the church and experienced Jesus in that church. Same thing with Pentecostal. Now, for me personally, it kind of like had the opposite effect, because it got to a place where how some people would make what they would make Pentecostal be. I was kind of embarrassed to tell people like I was Pentecostal. Like they'd be like, "What's your background?" Pentecostal. Because they'd be like, "Oh, the snake handlers." Yeah. But truly, the thing is that's how people made it out, but that's not really what Pentecostal was. So I titled this message, "What is with those Pentecostals?" So we're going to find out who the Pentecostals are. So they did a survey. I came across a survey when preparing for this message. They went into churches that claimed to be Pentecostal, and they asked the people in the congregation of those churches, what does it mean to be Pentecostal? And these answers resonated with me with growing up in a Pentecostal church, and so I just want to share them with you, some of them. Number one, we're the loud worshipers. Oh, okay, if that's what you want to be known for. Like, if I go and say, hey, Roy, I want you to meet my friend Brian. He's really loud. Like, you're going to be like, yeah, I'm busy that day, Jimmy. I haven't told you the day. Yeah, I'm busy all the days you want me to meet that loud guy. Like, you just think, like, this is the guy I'm going to be embarrassed to go to Olive Garden with. Because he's going to be talking, like, we're loud. Hey, oh, look at that person over there. They're loud. Like, you don't think, oh, man, I want to get to know them. They're loud. So it's like, oh, yeah, we're the loud worshipers. This one, we're the tongue talkers. Okay, but is that really what you want to be known for? Because, Michael, I have never one time, ever, never once, in any church I've ever been a part of, they came up, hey, we're going to change the name of the church. We're going to put out on the sign, the tongue talkers. And, man, people are going to come out of the woodwork to come to this church because we're the tongue talkers. Like, is that what you want to be known for? How about this one? The hand raisers. What does that even mean? Like, you're just walking to Walmart, like, oh, they must be Pentecostal. Like, you look over, and I see, like, Bernie's raising his hands. I'm like, oh, another Pentecostal. What's up, man? Yeah, we're the hand raisers. The hand raisers? Seriously? I love this one. We're the energetic worshipers. This is one of those, it's just like the pictures that go on in your mind. I am thinking like a worship service, like ran by Richardson. Like, all right, guys, we're just going to stretch for Jesus. We're going to do 50 of these right now. Energetic? What does that even mean? And people have this is like what Pentecostal is, and a lot of it is a reason like I was like, I don't want to tell people that I'm Pentecostal. I ran across this was actually on Facebook yesterday, and I was like, I am going to steal that. It was on somebody's post. It was a quote by William J. Seymour. I don't know if we have it for the screen, but it is on this paper. And it says this: the Pentecostal power, when you sum it all up, is just more of God's love. If it does not bring more love, it is simply a counterfeit. And I was like, that is so true, because God is love. And when we experience more of God, we experience more love. So if it's not, it don't matter how awesome of a service and how many laps you run and how many times you roll underneath the chairs, you go out of there and you see somebody walking there and you're like, oh, I hate that guy. I can't believe he comes to Fairlawn. Like, you maybe need to question some things. I remember there used to be this one preacher who was on TV. He still is on TV, actually. He was one of my favorite preachers back in the day. And I had a friend that was like, he was not a big fan of this guy. And we were watching him on TBN or something. And he was praying for people, and it was in a revival service. And he stopped, and he just looked right at the camera, and he goes, good God, I'm anointed. And he, for the next, 20 minutes, I mean, it seemed like it, he rolled back and forth on that stage, dropped to the ground and just rolled back and forth, at least, 30 times. And just oh, my gosh, what in the world? Huh?
Was he a
Pentecostal.
Pentecostal?
So, I want to look at Acts chapter 2, verse 42 and 47. I don't know that we got this one either, but it's on the paper. I'm going to read it out of the Passion Translation. This is the effect. This is what happens when you experience true Pentecost. When you really experience the encounter with God. It says, every believer was faithfully devoted to following the teachings of the apostles. Their hearts were mutually linked to one another, sharing communion and coming together regularly for prayer. A deep sense of holy awe swept over everyone, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. All the believers were in fellowship as one body, and they shared with one another whatever they had. Out of generosity, they even sold their assets and distributed the proceeds to those who were in need among them. Daily, they met together in the temple courts and in one another's homes to celebrate communion. They shared meals together with joyful hearts and tender humility. They were continuously filled with praises to God enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord kept adding to their number daily those who were coming to life. First thing they did, they experienced Pentecost. They weren't like, hey guys, let's just go out and get some t-shirts that say tongue talkers. No. They said, where's there a need? Who can we help? What mine is yours. I need to sell something that's mine to take care of you. I'm going to do it. That's what an encounter with God does. It increases that love. So I want to look at some scriptures. And when we look at these scriptures, I want us to look at what's happening in these scriptures. But more importantly, I want us to find our place in these scriptures and figure out like what's happening inside of us because of what happened in these scriptures. So, talking about the day of Pentecost, you probably have some questions. Question number one that most people have is, why were they all together in the upper room? Why were they all there? Why? Because it was the Feast of Pentecost. It was 50 days after Passover. That's what Pentecost means. Penta is 50. 50 days after Pentecost. Feast of Pentecost. They were all together. That's what they do. Now, this had to be, if I was around them, this would have been my favorite feast. Why? Well, let's look at Leviticus chapter 23, 15, and 17. And you'll see. It says, from the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheep of the wave offering, count off 7 full weeks. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath. And then present an offering of new grain to the Lord. From wherever you live, bring 2 loaves made of 2/10 of an ephah. Everybody knows what an ephah is. Come on. Of the finest flour, baked with yeast, as a wave offering of first fruits to the Lord. Now, here's the thing. All the other instructions in the Bible and all the other feasts is you have unleavened bread, no yeast. Not this one. Feast of Pentecost, put in the yeast. Now, I'm going to show you the difference, okay? You know, like when you do communion, those little white wafers? You know why they taste so bad? Unleavened. Yeah, unleavened. So, here's the difference. Unleavened, leavened. Yeah. Feast of Pentecost, having Dixie cream. That's why we had Dixie cream. Like, bring those Dixie cream, let's have some communion. You know what I'm saying? That's the difference. Which one would you rather have? If it's this, get out. Something's wrong with you. Kidding. Just leave all the donuts for us. So it's interesting, right? Like, why with this? Why? Because God is saying that he wants us leaven and all. You put in the yeast, you take the oil symbolizing the power of God, the Spirit of God, and they would pour it into the bread, and it would come together. And it was God's power mixing with the bread, yeast and all, leaven and all, God's power impacting our lives, leaven and all. Now, you see the same thing that happens just like in Acts here, in Leviticus 23:22. He says, when you reap the harvest, this is talking about the Feast of Pentecost, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God. So he's saying, take care of those that are in need. Don't just go and grab it. Just leave it for them. Take care of them. God is teaching them something here. Now, for me to really tell you the history, or to tell you about Pentecost, I feel like I got to give you a little bit of backstory. I'm going to do this really fast. We don't have time to go through it all. I'm only going to take like maybe 2-3 hours tops on this. And so there was this dude named Abraham. Now, if you went to Sunday school, you know it's saying Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. And you do all this dancing. That was the only time in a Pentecostal church you were allowed to do dancing, unless you was by the Spirit. Then you could do it, but that's another story. But there was this dude named Abraham. Now, he had a son. His son's name was Isaac. Isaac had a son. His name was Jacob. Now, Jacob had 12 sons. But here's the thing. Jacob had a favorite. Now, if you do have a favorite kid, you probably should not, just go out of your way to make it known that they're your favorite. But Jacob was like, no, I'm going to, whatever Joseph needs, he's got it. So he got him this coat of many colors. I mean, you remember that, Mr. Miyagi? The coat? Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty, I know. And it made all the other sons jealous. So 10 of the other brothers, they decided, hey, you know what we're going to do? We are going to sell the one, Dad's favorite, we're going to sell him into slavery. And we're going to sell him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt. Now, here's the thing. A lot of weird stuff happened, okay? Joseph ends up being number 2 in charge of Egypt. Went there as a slave, now he's number 2 over all of Egypt. There's a famine in the land. His family, his brothers, come to him. They don't know it's him. And they're like, we are hungry. We need to survive. Now, Joseph, instead of paying them back, instead of retaliating, what he does is he shows mercy to them. He gives them food. Then he gives them land. He says, hey, get everybody together. Come over here to Egypt. And they gave him land to take care of. So they gave him food, gave him land. They get there. They start procreating. This small little family becomes this huge big family, this huge clan, this huge tribe. Now they're overpopulating Egypt. And there's a new Pharaoh. Joseph's gone. And he is like, what am I going to do? There are Israelites everywhere. There are Hebrew people everywhere. And he said, well, the only logical thing I can think to do is make them slaves. So they did that. And they made them slaves. And they were slaves to the people in Egypt. And they treated them as so. Then, 430 years later, God raises up a deliverer. His name, Moses. And he leads God's people out of slavery and into freedom. Now, there's a series of unbelievable events that take place that we don't have time to get into. But he leads them through the Red Sea. They get through the Red Sea. And they get to this unusual place, this mountain called Mount Sinai. And we read about it in Exodus 20, verse 1 and 2. And it says, and God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. So here we are, 1,500 years before the upper room experience. 1,500 years before Acts chapter 2. Moses goes up Mount Sinai, and he gets what we call the Ten Commandments from God. And what the Jewish culture, they don't call them the Ten Commandments. They celebrate this time as them receiving the Torah, as they receiving the Word of God. They don't call it the Ten Commandments, and we do. It's fine that we do. I call it the Ten Commandments. You call it the Ten Commandments. But they actually use the word Aseret Hadabra. Aseret Hadabra. Try to say it. Very difficult. I practice. Aseret Hadabra. Now, that don't mean 10 commandments. What that means is the 10 declarations. What is God declaring? He's declaring his love towards his people. They also call it a 10-word ketubah. What is a ketubah? Ketubah is a marriage contract. What's going on here is Jehovah God is proposing to his people. They would have known this. It would have clicked in their mind right away. This is all, in Jewish culture, this is all marriage talk. This is wedding talk. All of Exodus is laid out like an ancient Hebrew wedding. Now, there's 5 levels of existence for an ancient Hebrew relationship. Now, if you're a Bible nerd, those are Laka, Tegula, Mikvah, Ketubah, and Huppah. If you are not a Bible nerd, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So to illustrate these 5 levels of a relationship in the Jewish culture, I'm going to tell you a story. Some truth in the story, some, maybe not, but some truth. Let's say I start talking, me, Jimmy, start talking to this chick named Julie. This hot blonde. I mean, she looks good, okay? I start talking to her. There's chemistry right away. Like, she's funny. Obviously, she thinks I'm funny. We start talking, and I ask her to go on a date. And I'm like, I like to take her for hibachi. And we go to this place in Port St. Lucie called Hokkaido. Now, when we're there eating hibachi, there is just something about this noise with the sound of her voice that's just like, ooh, I think I could really fall for this. So we leave hibachi. I take her to Walmart, buy some dog food for her dog. We may or may not make out in the bowling alley parking lot.
Come on, John Jimmy.
And see, there's this involuntary rush of dopamine that goes to our brain that's called limerence. Now, what is limerence? It's an intense state of infatuation or romantic attraction towards another person. In other words, it goes on, it's something that happens, psychological reaction that goes on in the brain. That's like, it's like you get addicted to a person. Like when you have feelings for them and they have feelings for you, it goes off in the brain. That's why you can speak to somebody on the phone for 4 hours and it seems like 10 minutes. I hear married couples that have been married for like 10 years, and they're like, I just want to get back to that place where we could just talk on the phone for like 4 hours, and it just goes so quick. And I'm like, no, you are past that. That is something that's limerence. There's a reason that happens. Why does it happen that way? God made us that way because that's where it has that want and desire to get to know that person. I remember when Julie and I first got together, I would ask her so many questions. She would ask me so many questions. I remember asking her one time, what is your favorite donut? You know what her response was, Pastor Rocky? I don't eat donuts. That was the first time she ever lied to me. It's Bavarian cream. But you just want to know anything. Like it's how our bodies work. Like when you first start dating, like you can talk 4 hours. It seems like 10 minutes. After you're married 10 years, you're like, just text me, please. Just a quick text is all I need.
Oh, boy.
So we get past the initial phase. I'm talking about other people, Miss Linda. No, not you and Rocky. We get past the initial phase. I take her back to Hokkaido, but this time we have sushi instead of hibachi. And she orders the firecracker roll. And I'm like, ooh, that's a brave move. It's a little risky. I think I could spend my life with this one. I walk her to the door and I say the word that every woman wants to hear. Laka. Laka. She gets weak at the knees. She goes inside. She calls her 3 best friends. He said Laka to me. He said Laka to me. I go, what's Laka? Laka is a Jewish term. It means take as one's own. Now, I realize this is 2023, and you may be like, what do you mean you're going to take me? Like you own me? You own me? I know. Little more romantic than that, okay? It's essentially, will you be mine? Look at Exodus 6 and 7. It says, therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my what? I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of Egyptians. It is all wedding talk. You didn't have to explain it to them. They just knew this is all wedding talk. It's revolutionary. Because see, all the gods that they're familiar with before, well, those gods, they didn't relate to humans. But this God is interested, engaging in your story to make a better story. And it's revolutionary. Back to the story about Julie and me. After I said Raka, the next word that she would be desired to hear me say is Segula. Because eventually the excitement of Raka wears off. Her three best friends would call her and say, has he said Segula yet? Has he said Segula? Not yet. What's wrong with him? Does he have commitment issues? Shut up. He'll say Segula when he wants to say it. When he's ready to say it. But deep in her heart, she has the desire to hear me say Segula. This time, I take her to an uppity restaurant. My buddy Bob says, if you want to take her to a nice place, take her to Moonshwine. I take her to Moonshwine. She orders the barbecue beef sandwich, French fries, extra beans, and it gets my attention. I'm like, ooh, this girl likes to take risks. Yeah. I think I could spend the rest of my life with her. She likes a challenge. I walk her to the door. I hold her hands. I look at her in the eyes. And I say, ooh. She almost passes out. She quickly goes inside. She calls her mom. Jimmy said Segula to me. He said Segula. She's maybe doing one of these jumping up. She said Segula. He said Segula. She's all excited. Now, Segula, what it means is treasured possession. Again, I realize it's 2023. Like, oh, what, now I'm your possession? What? You own me and I'm just your possession? No, that is more romantic than that. What that was saying is, you are the most important person in the world to me. Look at Exodus 19:5. See if we can pick up some wedding talk here. In Exodus 19:5. It says, now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, even though I own all this, you are the most treasured possession. I value you over all these other things. Segula. Now, the next level of this, Jen, isn't quite as romantic. Because the next level is mikvah. Mikvah. Now, what mikvah was is a 3-day notice, that I'm going to propose to you. And you're like, oh, that's kind of exciting, right? Now, there was none, back in Jewish culture, there was no, surprise proposals, like taking them out to the beach and under the moonlight, and you have a photographer there, and they're snapping pictures. As you get on one knee, there was none of that. If you wanted to marry someone, if you're going to propose to them, you would just say, mikvah. Now, what mikvah meant was, go wash. All right, girl, in 3 days, I'm going to propose to you, and you will smell it. So, go wash. I ain't going to have no smelly fiance. Maybe brush your teeth. You got a little Dale's barbecue in there. There's a 3-day notice this guy's to marry. Let's see if we can find that wedding talk here. Exodus 19, 10 and 11. It says, and the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the what? The third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. This would have signaled right away. It would have pictured right away. This God is about to propose to his people. And he has told them, go wash. Because in 3 days, he's about, Exodus 19, go wash. Exodus 20, he gives the Ten Commandments. So we come to the fourth level in a Jewish relationship. And this is the word ketubah. Ketubah is a marriage contract. See, this is what would happen in Jewish culture. If after I proposed to Julie, then what would happen is she would go and she'd get her dad. And I would go and I'd get my dad. We would come together and we'd sit down at this table. Right? And why was our dads there? 2 reasons. 1, they're witnesses to this marriage contract. 2, wisdom. Because there may be some stuff that I want to put in there that my dad, in his age, because from his experiences, he knows, oh, that's not going to work. That's not going to fly. I'm like, I want you every night at 7 p.m. watch the New York Mets. And my dad's like, oh, Jenny, every night? Like, yeah, it's not going to work. Yeah, it's not going to fly. Like, no. So, I want, like, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, key lime pie. Jimmy, no, that's too far. So they were there as witnesses and for wisdom. And we would sit down and we would write out a ketubah, a marriage contract. She would put whatever she wants to put in there, and I would put whatever I want. It's expectations of how we see this marriage playing out. And here's the thing. If we broke that marriage contract, there's witnesses. Both of our dads were witnesses to this. So if we did anything to break this contract, it would be marital unfaithfulness. Now, I've sat under pastors, and I've heard messages of talking about, regardless of what's going on in your marriage, regardless of the abuse or whatever, you have to stay with them because God hates divorce. And I have had this, and I was, as a youth pastor, I sat in my pastor's office as he was counseling with this lady who was being physically abused in her marriage. He said, you can't divorce her. You can't go. Because divorce is forbidden. You can't divorce her. She's sitting there, crying, bruises up and down her arms, saying, no, you just got to put up with it. God will change him. God will change him. It took everything I had not to say something. And here's the thing. That doctrine is not based in Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic. It's actually based in Latin. And it's called Bullimus Crapimus. I can't think of what the English translation is, kind of escapes me right now. But in Latin, Bullimus Crapimus. Now I found this, and it's so cool. It's so cool. In the Jewish culture, there's not many in the Jewish, unless you are just very wealthy, do you own your own home. So what would happen most of the time is there would be these family compounds. And if you Google it, you can still see it. You can see some. There's still some from biblical days that are still around, these family compounds. And what these family compounds were is they would be on the street, and on the front of the street would be the family business. So if you were a seamstress, or if you were a cook, or whatever, like that was your family business. Now, right behind the family business, right behind the storefront, was whoever the oldest person in the house. So it might be the great-grandparents or something. They would live there. And then behind them was the grandparents, and then the parents, and then you. And it went from oldest to youngest. And what would happen in these compounds, in these homes, there would be this long hallway. And down that hallway would be rooms to your left, rooms to your right. So it was like room, 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 room. And when the only time if you're like, oh yeah, so-and-so's moving out, that wasn't a good sign, because the only time they moved out is like they died. So when they would, like the great-grandparents, when they had passed away, the grandparents would move up to the front and everybody would move down. Now, what happened is they'd have the people, they would have different kids and different people would move in. So a lot of times there needed to be rooms that were built on to these homes. Now sometimes there were rooms that were available because someone passed away or whatever, but they needed to be fixed up because they hadn't really been worked on for a while. So what would happen is when you would propose, if the man proposed to the woman, he would then, that it was expected that they would move into the family compound, into the family home. And they would, after the proposal, the man would say something like this, because he's going to have to go back, he's going to have to fix up the room and for him and his bride, and he can't, and the dad, his father, has to say whether it's acceptable or not. Yeah, okay, no, you need an extra window there, no, I think he deserves crown molding, and whatever, and so not until the dad put his approval on it could he then go and get his bride, and they have the wedding. So the man may say something like this: in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. Don't worry, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back and I'm going to get you. And then when I do, we are always going to be together. You're going to live with me. See, when Jesus said these words to the apostles, to the disciples, they would have known exactly what he was talking about. Why? Because this is wedding talk. Marriage talk. See, you see the Ten Commandments like commands, well, they're kind of hard to swallow, but you see them as declarations. You see them as a marriage proposal, and it's beautiful. Like this, hey, don't have any gods before me. I mean, that makes sense. It's like, look, if we're going to be married, like, I would like to be the only one. Like, Julie, if we're going to get married, like, maybe don't like have any other husband. Like, don't get married to anybody else. Like, that makes sense, right? And don't have any idols. Like, in other words, like, all these pictures of your ex-boyfriends up here, yeah, they got to go. Yeah. Yeah, we can't have Zach Morris' picture up in the, you know what I'm saying? See, the Israelites, these people, they had been slaves for 430 years. So when he says, hey, honor the Sabbath, like, said, hey, you know what? Let's have one day a week where you turn your cell phone off. We don't turn the TV off, and we just spend time just you and me.
Amen.
Like, just spend time with just us. Like, tune everything else out. Like, they have been slaves for 430 years. When was the last time they had a day off? Never. They have never. You mean we get to take a day off? We don't have to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Like, we get a day off? This would have been revolutionary. They wouldn't have been like, oh, dang it, we can't work. No, like, you want to spend time with me just one day? No, this was God telling them, hey, we're going to get married. I'm proposing to them and saying, hey, this new world we're creating, it's going to be different than that world you were living in Egypt. You know, the one that, like, it broke you, it almost killed you. You didn't know if you were going to make it past that day. That's gone. There's a new covenant. And we're going to build a new life in a new world. And he's teaching them how this is going to go. Hey, maybe it'd be a good idea. Let's just not kill anybody. Like, how about that? Like, that sounds good, right? Wait, so you mean like the strongest and most powerful people can't just come and kill us? Because that's what happened in Egypt. The Jewish people, the Egyptians could just come and kill them with no consequences. They didn't work fast enough to kill them. There's so many of them anyways. Here's another one. Don't steal. You mean the biggest and strongest people just can't come and take my stuff? Because that's what was happening in Egypt. Hey, how about this one? I got a good idea. Like, don't sleep with other people's spouses. You mean the biggest, strongest, most powerful people can't just come and rape our wives? Because that's what was happening in Egypt. See, they wouldn't have seen this as a bunch of rules, but it was a new way of living. It was God showing them how to be human. It was liberating. Moses comes down with this marriage proposal. And you can come up and you can play something super spiritual. Because this is really going to hit home. Moses comes down with this marriage proposal. And the Bible says that they saw thunder and lightning. And that's a little weird. Because if we were going to do that, we would say we saw lightning and we heard thunder. But they didn't. Said we saw thunder and lightning. And he said we heard a trumpet. Now Moses is standing at the edge of the mountain. 1,500 years before the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. Smoke covers the Israelites. They see thunder. The Hebrew word here is kolot. K-O-L-O-T. Everywhere else in the Bible, that is translated voices. The presence of God covers them. They see lightning. By the way, lightning has the same characteristics as fire. They're just trying to explain this the best way they can. That we see lightning. And within that lightning, we see thunder. Within the fire, we look up. And what do they see? They see voices. They see languages. What are they saying? I'm going to throw this out there. Perhaps, will you marry me? See, the Talmud says on this day in history, God proposed to all of creation by using 70,000 tongues of fire. The fifth word is this word hoopah. Now the hoopah, this is the wedding. Now what a hoopah was, it was the covering. And what they would do, there was two hoopahs. And we still have this today. There's usually like an archway or some form of hoopah, but they would use a talit, a prayer shawl, and they would take it and they would just take 4 sticks and they would hold this up, and this is what they would get married underneath. It was symbolized God's covering. And they would get married with all their friends and family as witnesses. Now there was a second hoopah. And that, they took 4 sticks and they took the prayer shawl and they hung it over the marriage bed, the wedding bed. And because that is not really a good spectator sport, God would witness consummation of marriage. And here's the thing, like, it's kind of like taboo, like now, I guess, like, but then it couldn't be kind of awkward, because what would happen is they'd go into the room, into the house, and everybody at the wedding, friends and family, they would just stand outside. Really awkward, right? 30 seconds later, they'd walk out. Good. Now, here's the thing. If you get married, something happens. There's a certain event that happens every year on the day you got married. What is that? Anniversary. Your anniversary, right? And if you are not celebrating your anniversary, you probably should. Willis. Gary, you give me that $10 later. So here we are, the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, 1,500 years later. As a reminder, you remember back when we got together and we could just speak on the phone for 4 hours and it seemed like 10 minutes. A lot of times after so many years, like 25 years, 10 years, 25 years, whatever, people do something at their anniversary. What is it? Renewing of the vows. I love weddings, but I love vow renewals because here's the cool thing. Like, there's been some time, there's been some good times, there's been some bad times. And all that plays a part. So when they renew their vows, they don't say the exact same thing that they said as vows when they got married because they've been through some stuff. So they sound a little bit different. And I love that because here we got the disciples and all these believers on the day of Pentecost. Pentecost meaning 50. 50 also represents Jubilee. You know what Jubilee is? Jubilee is that is after every 50 years you just forgive everything. All that stuff you can't remit. Like no more scorekeeping. Like, oh yeah, the year Jubilee, like just forgive everything. Eddie owes you $10. You just lost that $10, Pastor Rocky. What 50 means is it represents fresh starts, do-over, second chances, clean slates, mulligans, and a chance for a better tomorrow. Is God saying, as they renew their vows with God, Him saying, I just want to remind you, I want you, leaven and all. I know you've been having a hard time with some of these. Wedding contract. I know you've had a hard time keeping some of this. I just want to remind you, you weren't so perfect when I met you. Julie and I have been married for a little bit now, and I can tell you 100%, my love for her is so much stronger and farther than it was that day that I married. And here's 1,500 years. God renewing His vows. And I just want to remind you, I wanted you. I know you're down on yourself. You're upset that you messed up there, you messed up there, you messed up there. But I just want to remind you, I want you leaven and all. But then He's also saying, I just also want to remind you, you know, those other people, yeah, I want them leaven and all too. Because a lot of times, like it's like, okay, yeah, God forgives my leaven, but then we want to point out everybody else's leaven. God's saying, no. I want them leaven and all, just like I want you leaven and all. Because you take that leavened bread and you pour that oil in it, in the presence of God, that, my friend, is what changes. God's saying, I want you leaven and all. I'm redeeming you. And I'm making a new covenant. Because that's what it's all about. He's establishing a new covenant. And they're celebrating Pentecost together. And the Bible says a cloud of the presence of God covered them. Pupa. And they saw languages of fire sitting above their heads. Sounds familiar. Exact same thing in Exodus. But only this time, the only difference is they spoke back. And it was the birth of the church, the bride of Christ. This is all wedding talk, my friend. It says they spoke in tongues, but they didn't go, yep, we're the tongue talkers now. Order the t-shirts. No. It wasn't about being tongue talkers. No. It's about they were moved so much that God engaged with them. They went out and they sold all they could. And they blessed people who could do nothing in return. It's one thing to bless someone that can then bless you. It's like, scratch my back, I scratch yours. No, people that cannot do anything in return. Why? Because that's what it means to be Pentecostal. Oh, I can get down with that. If we can get that out there, I'll tell people all day long I'm Pentecostal. The Pentecostals are supposed to be known for their excessive, ridiculous, compassionate generosity. Acts 2, 44, 45. After the filling of the Holy Ghost, this is what they did. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Oh, you got a need? Maybe I can sell something and I can help you with that need. And it continued, Acts chapter 4, 32, 35. It says, the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And God's grace was so powerful at work in them all that there were no needy person among them. How amazing would that be if we looked out at the family of Fairlawn and said, nope, none of us are in need. Why is that church down the street? Like, we're all good. What do they need down there? For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. That's what happens when you encounter the presence of God.